for a little bit, but
Do it.
so glad you're here. So glad. I'm Alison Frenzel. I'm one of the co-owner of Fabled. And Elizabeth can introduce herself too.
And I'm Elizabeth Barnhill, the book buyer at Fabled. And Eleanor, I don't know if you remember, but we met at the MPIBA conference.
I do.
Yes. Okay. So I didn't know. And I'm actually in Colorado again. So this is
you
not.
are.
Yeah. I'm in Aspen. So this is not my normal background. I'm feeling very cabin chic.
Oh, but you're in Aspen. You went just for the setting of the book. I appreciate that level of commitment.
I didn't even think about that.
We totally have that kind of budget too. This bookshop budget. I'm like, we need to make this authentic.
Yeah.
We need to send
to Aspen. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Actually, 5 days ago, one of my dear friends said her sister has a place and it opened up, but can I drop everything and go? And so here I am.
And
yeah.
you said yes, because
yes.
I don't know how hot it is in Texas. It's pretty hot in Denver.
Yes.
It's 90 degrees in Aspen today, which I apparently brought here from Texas. So
thank you for that. Yeah.
Yes. I told Elizabeth, I was like, that's not what you order. That's not the Texas you order.
But it's in the 50s for my coffee in the morning. So all will be forgiven.
Right.
If that happens. But yes, I love that full immersion experience with the book. Right?
I'm going to start writing books like set in Greece, just so I can go and we can all have book club there.
Oh, I love that. That's actually not a bad idea to do a destination book club
for research.
Yes, for research. Yes. Well, I'm so thankful that you're here, and I'm so excited to talk about this book because I feel like there is lots to discuss. But I'm just going to tell everyone in the chat, if you have a question for Eleanor, you can write it in the chat. You can also write it in the Q&A and we'll try to get to it. Hopefully we address something that you have on your mind, but if not, we'll try to get to everybody's. And Eleanor, how this works is first we'll have Elizabeth introduce you, and then we kind of have questions we've already written. So we'll just go back and forth, and spoilers are allowed. So if you've not read the book, feel free to exit out. You'll get a recording of this anyway tomorrow. So anybody who hasn't read it, you can wait and view it later.
You won't find out who the serial killer is at the end.
Exactly, right. Yeah, we're going to talk about the car chase and who the murderer was.
Yeah.
Right.
So anyways, but so I'll let Elizabeth introduce you.
All right. So we are so happy to have you. Eleanor, when I met you, I thought, oh, you were such a delight. I really, really wanted to have you as one of our guests. So I'm so glad that this worked out. But Eleanor Brown is the New York Times bestselling author of the novels The Weird Sisters and The Light of Paris, and the editor of the anthology A Paris All Your Own. An adoptive mother herself, Eleanor lives with her family in Colorado. We are so happy to have you. And I think, first of all, this is, of all the books I've read this year, this is one of the top 2 books that I think is really, really ripe for discussion. So I'm so glad that you were able to, that I just want to talk to people about this book. And actually, when you were discussing this book to us and pitching it, we know a family in Waco who does this, and they all go to each other's, all the football games, the basketball games. There's just a group that they do everything together. So I think it really is something that's not science fiction. It actually happens. And it's so interesting. So can you let us know a little bit about how you came up with the premise of Any Other Family?
Sure. Well, I'll start by telling my personal story, which is what brought me to this book. So 4 years ago, February 15th, 2018, I was sitting at home with my husband on a Thursday night. We were watching the Olympics in South Korea, and I got a phone call from my OBGYN. And I don't know about you, but my OBGYN does not normally call me just to say, hey, at 9 o'clock on Thursday night. I hadn't seen her in like a year, so there was no reason for her to call me. And she calls me and she says, listen, I had a woman come in for her annual exam yesterday, and it turns out she's 6 months pregnant and she didn't know it. And she wants to make a plan for adoption. And you were the first people I thought of. Do you want a baby? Now, that is the first time in my entire life anybody has ever called me to offer me another human being. It hasn't happened since then. You know, my husband and I had wanted kids, but we hadn't had them for various reasons. And, you know, we kind of moved on. So this was a really big surprise to us. But to make a long story short, 3 months later, we were in the delivery room while our son was born. And he is now 4 and just started big boy pre-K school. But we have an open adoption, which means that he has a relationship and we have a relationship with his birth family. So both his birth parents and their extended families. And when I would talk to people about this and tell people about our relationship with them, I just got all these wild questions and you know, sometimes rude, sometimes just curious, but that's fine. I'm happy to talk about it. People sometimes don't know what kind of question they're asking. But the more I thought about it, I thought, you know, adoption doesn't look like it used to. And I think, like, you know, the picture that we have in our head of it. And so I had a lot of questions about what our family is going to look like and how things are going to work. And other people clearly had questions about those things. So I did what I always do when I don't have the answers to questions. I took all my questions and I made up some people and gave the questions to them and said, you figure it out, because I cannot figure it out. And that was how this story came to be, was really just kind of, how can I help people talk about and broaden their understanding of adoption, and how can I work through some of my questions about adoption and what this very special kind of family means.
That's so cool. Well, Elizabeth and I both have boys. And I want to share with you that 4 years old is a magic age with boys.
I was just going to say the same
thing. It really is.
4-year-old boy, if I could go back and have any age, it would be 4 years old.
Really? Why?
It's all downhill from there.
No, it's not.
they're you know, I feel like you can reason with them a little bit better. They're just precious.
They really are.
Finally potty trained. They're so sweet and loving, and I don't know. There was just something so magical about 4.
It is. I know. Yeah. I know. I was like, well, she needs to know. Yeah. I feel the same way. Where my 4-year-old son, there's just something. They're just not in the, I don't know, in the world that's going to make them feel like they have to be tough. Or they're just so sensitive and sweet and externally loving. It's just such a sweet age. So
yeah, he's very much in the I love you mama stage, and it's so sweet. I will say that I could do with some fewer why questions. Like I always try to answer them in some way, because I know it's his way of making conversation, but sometimes I'm just like, I just need a break. You just got to give mama a little break.
Yes.
And it's not all downhill. They're all wonderful. 11 is if 11 is hard, but everything else.
And I have an 11-year-old boy.
Well, I used to teach middle school. So to me, I'm like 11 through 14, I am psyched for. Everybody else is like, oh gosh, I can't believe that's coming. And I'm like, no, that is going to be my moment, because I love that age. I love it so much.
That's so fun. I love that.
I like middle school too. I think this was a little bit before middle school. For us, that was 5th grade.
Yes.
I don't know. But my boys love middle school. I think it gets a bad rap, and it shouldn't.
Yeah.
All right. I guess we should talk about the book. Sorry.
We can talk about boys. Eleanor, you have a really interesting story about when you were in your pre-adoption class. And the parents were asked if they were going to do a closed or open adoption. And there is a man that said something interesting to you that kind of stuck with you. I'd love to have you tell us that story.
Yeah. So, oh gosh, I'm not going to remember like exactly what you want me to say, but I'll tell you kind of the context of it. So, what's interesting to me, one of the things that's interesting to me about adoption versus having biological kids is that you know, if you have a biological child and you tell someone that you're pregnant, they say, congratulations. And they say, when are you due? Right? Nobody says to you, so what makes you think you're going to be a good parent? And why do you want kids? Which is what happens to you when you adopt. And one of the things you have to go through is training. And I really wish that all parents would go through it because it's so helpful. I mean, you talk about all kinds of things, yes, adoption specific things, but just also general parenting things and relationship things. So one of the things that we talked about was kind of like putting us in the perspective of the birth family and our future child, and kind of like, what would it be like to be then? And so one of the questions they asked, they had us go into 3 groups. They said, if you would like to have an open adoption, go stand over here. If you would like sort of a semi-open adoption, then go here. And if you would like a closed adoption, go over here. And I remember one of the guys saying, like, he like made a motion like this, and he was like, I just want it to be as clean as possible. Like he wanted a closed adoption because he thought that would be clean somehow. And I was like, I don't know, like I still think about him, and it's like, well, okay, but there are other people involved in this besides you, right? And we know from the past, we know from experience that they're not always possible. Okay, open adoptions are not always possible or advisable or safe for the child, but when they are, they can be really beneficial to the kid, right? And what would it be like, you know, if you had all these questions about your birth family and you didn't have anyone to answer them, right? We know this is what it was like for years and years and years when adoption was this super shameful thing, and there was this, you know, cutoff between those two things. So, I mean, you know, I understand like the desire to sort of have it, but family doesn't work that way, right? Like biological family is not clean and tidy, and family by marriage is not clean and tidy, and family by adoption is not clean and tidy. So like whatever you're looking for, sir, like you are not going to find it. And I also think that that's not about, you know, what adoption is putting the life and the needs of this child before anything else, and saying like, what is going to be the optimal life for this child, and saying like, I just want it to be clean. Like that's not putting your kid first, you know. So yeah, I still think about him. And there was one other family that was just very special, bless their hearts, that I think about too.
That's so great.
Yeah, after I closed this book, my first thought was, you just write women so well. And I loved the 3 different, vastly different mothering type, and really, I guess in a way, a 4th mothering type with Brianna, but they're so different, the parenting. And I think we can all, I mean, I know that Pinterest mom, I know that the one who's a little more hesitant. So what was your reasoning behind kind of making everyone so different? And was there a mothering type that you found that was harder to write? And maybe which one did you most relate to?
Oh
So
gosh, that's a lot of things.
I was room mother 15 times at my elementary school, so I'm sure you could figure out who I was. So one of the things I was trying to do with this book was get as many sort of perspectives on adoption as possible in here. So we have this narrative about adoption that it's like, there's a couple and they have fertility issues and adoption is their last resort. And that's not the case at all, right? There are all kinds of reasons people choose to build or expand their families through adoption. So one of the things I was trying to do was get sort of different perspectives, right? So you have Tabitha and Perry, who had in their family this experience of adoption, and so knew they wanted to grow their family that way. And you have Ginger, who sort of like, she's sort of my analogy to kinship adoption. So kinship adoption is when someone in the family, you know, either decides that they're not ready to parent or they're not capable of parenting, and a relative adopts the child, right? And it's sort of often the child's choice. So that's Ginger. And then Elizabeth and John do come to adoption through fertility issues, but it's not sort of like their last resort. So that was one part of it, was like, I wanted to get different angles on adoption. Another thing was that, you know, just the more, so I used to be a teacher, so I've seen a lot of parents, and being a teacher is a very interesting way to get a view on people's parenting, right? Because sometimes you talk to them and, you know, they talk to you about their child and you're like, have you ever met
your child. Like, so I wanted those different perspectives. And one of the things I describe adoption as being kind of like an arranged marriage, because if you marry someone for love, right? Like you meet them, you get to know them, you meet their family, you get to know their family, you probably have some values in common, some beliefs in common. Adoption is not like that. Like there's a baby, boom, you're a family. And you may not have any values in common, and you may not have any beliefs in common. All you have in common is that you are all optimally, concerned with making this child's life the best that it can be. So I wanted to put these different personalities together to show that, to show how, this is not like a family. They're not tied by blood. They're not tied by common history. All they have in common is these kids. And then I took a little piece of me and put it in each of the mothers. I definitely have the Pinterest mom part in me. I was texting with a friend of mine. So this was since his first birthday. He had then 2 COVID birthdays. So this was like his first real birthday party this year. And I'm texting with a friend of mine the night before. And I was like, I think I'm going to make mini charcuterie boards for all the kids. And she was like, what is wrong with
Lunchable.
you?
That's hilarious.
So that's like the Tabitha part of me. And then the ginger part of me, like I was thinking a lot about toddlerhood. Like I loved being an infant mom. Toddlerhood was harder for me.
Yeah.
And part of that is I think when I hit the point where I was like, I need you to stop touching me. Like, I just need you to stop touching me for 3 minutes. And so that's a little bit like who Ginger is. And I personally, I think Elizabeth has my sense of humor. She certainly has like my middle school teacher in there. And I was trying to get with her this idea that like not every parent loves every stage.
Yeah.
Right. And not every parent is like good at every stage, and you don't have to be. Right. And like, there's this weird sort of toxic positivity around adoption, where it's like, this child is a miracle and a gift. And it's like, yes, my child is a miracle and a gift. And I am also allowed to be frustrated sometimes and to be tired sometimes. And that does not make me a bad mother. But especially, I feel like that happens to everybody, and especially with adoption, right? Because it's like, how could you, like this miracle of a child appeared in your life. And it's like, yeah, and this miracle of a child, like also, like hit me and called me booty. So like,
right.
I'm allowed to be frustrated sometimes. So anyway, so that was kind of why I chose to get in there. I really like it. I really like sort of putting people in a house together and then seeing what happens. So that was a really fun way to kind of get at this book.
That's so fun. I love that you put a little bit of yourself in all the mothers. That's really neat. Did you feel like when you were writing it, because I mean, it was divided up into, I feel like very equal kind of pieces of these 3 different mothers. Is there one in particular that you really wanted people to focus on? Or do you feel like it was equally what motherhood looks like?
No, equally what motherhood looked like. And my hope was that, people would see themselves in these characters, and you don't have to be a parent to see yourself in these people, because really, like, to me, yes, the heart of this book is adoption. Okay. And there is like a heart of it that's motherhood too, but it's also just about family and about the baggage that we drag with us from our past into our present. And so yeah, like I really wanted people, I didn't really, it's funny, I don't know, like one of the things I learned with my first book with the Weird Sisters is like, when you put your book out into the world, you no longer control it, right? And that's what's so awesome about book clubs, is that everybody's going to bring their own thing to it, right? We all read the same book, but we all read different books. And so it's so funny to me when I talk to people who are like, oh, Tabitha's driving me crazy, or like, what's Elizabeth's problem? But that's good. That's exactly like, that's such a compliment. And Elizabeth saying like, this Elizabeth, not Elizabeth in the book. Elizabeth saying like, you write women so well. That's such a compliment to me, right? Because that means that there's something in each storyline and each person that people can respond to, and that makes me feel really good.
I would love to hear in the chat if there was a mother that you particularly, anyone who's in here, it resonated with, because I feel like I resonated with Elizabeth a lot, of kind of being good with like another age group. But even when you read the book, you realize she's so good with kids, but like being in the infant area, like stage, just being like, when are we going to get out of this stage? Like, I'm ready to go on to this other stage.
Right.
But feel free, if anybody wants to open up and say if there's a particular mother that you really resonated with, I would love to hear it.
All these Elizabeths in here.
Oh, that makes me so happy. I think the other thing with Elizabeth too, that I was trying to get at two things. Like, one, I was trying to get at grief and the way that grief manifests in different ways. Like, we think of grief as just like, I'm going to sit around and cry and eat M&Ms. And certainly there's that part of it. But, you know, I think female anger is so interesting, because we're not allowed, like in this culture, women are not allowed to be angry. Like, we are not raised to sort of have that be permissible. And she is mad, and she totally has every right to be angry. And I also think, like, to be totally fair, like that babyhood stage, my husband is like the loveliest, kindest, gentlest, best partner, best father. And when our son was born, I have never felt such hatred for another human being. Like, I was just mad at him all the time.
Right.
And I just feel like that's kind of one of these universal things about parenthood that we don't talk about, is like, you discover this deep and abiding love for your partner, and also this deep and abiding hatred for them at the same time.
Yes. I thought you did that so well with John. I was so frustrated with him. And, you know, he's doing the best he can.
Yeah.
But it reminds me of those days when you're like, can you not read my mind? You know?
Right. I'm at the end of my rope. Go ahead.
No, it's just, I think when you have a baby you bring in the world, you think, you know, when it gets really hard and you think, I just ruined a really good thing, and now it's going to be like this forever, you know. And that's hard when a good dynamic changes, you know, even if it's for the good, it is hard, especially when you're not sleeping. So.
Right. Yeah. And you lose all perspective, right? I mean, and that's like, here's the spoiler for you, is when does Elizabeth finally get her act together? When she gets a good night's sleep.
That's right.
And that's, I think, so true. You know, our child is an early riser by nature. He just naturally wakes up at 5:45. He has ever since he was.
Bless you.
I know. And he loves ice hockey. So I have the feeling that there are going to be a lot of early mornings in my future. But like, the difference when we get a good night's sleep is just huge, right?
Right.
So
I remember one of my biggest memories of having a newborn was looking around. I was at church and looking at every person in the building and thinking, I bet they slept all the time. I mean, it's just something this was, 23 years ago, but I really remember that's a weird thing to think. Like, I bet you slept.
Yeah. No, I remember being so tired sometimes that I felt like I'd see things. I mean, being that deprived.
Yeah.
And I should have taken care of myself and gone to bed. But,
yeah.
Yes, it's so hard. You don't know. I mean, but it gets better. You get to have a 4-year-old boy and all is well.
Well, I loved what you were saying about how when you have a book go into the world, you no longer own it. It's everybody else's book. And one thing that someone said to me was, I loved it, but I just can't believe Brianna. That surely somebody like Brianna that's not a real person. And I said, actually, yes, I worked with Medicaid patients, and my husband is a family lawyer, and he had CPS patients, and there were a lot, our CPS clients, and they were a lot like Brianna. And so, yes, there are people like Brianna in the world, but how do you, how was it to write her? Did you feel like you had to tread carefully? How were you able to honor her? While maybe the world's looking at her thinking, how are you doing this over and over and over again?
Right. Yeah, this was so hard. So first of all, my editor and I had some conversations about, like, does she need a voice, right? Like, does she need to have some chapters? And I said no for two reasons. One was simply like, this is a big book. Like, just to have the core adoptive family is 9 people, like 9 people in a room. And it's, there's all this like stage man, and it's like, where's Perry? Has anybody seen Perry? Where's the baby? When was the last time we saw the baby, right? So there was like just that mathematical issue. Then there was the issue of what I felt comfortable speaking to. And I was like, well, I'm not an adoptee and I'm not a birth parent, but I am an adoptive mother. And so I really feel like, and that's the story that I care about right now and that I really want to tell. And then there was, I really struggled a lot with Brianna, because again, when we talk about like narratives about adoption, when I tell people that my son is adoption, they're like, oh, you know, well, they usually say was his mom, but was his birth mom really young?
Mm-hmm.
And no, she wasn't actually. She was 25, I think, when my son was, no, she must have been older, 26 when my son was born. But she wasn't ready to parent. And that's just, you know, and that was her decision. You know, she and the birth father had broken up. And so like that would have added an additional layer of complexity to parenting for them. You know, so we have this narrative that women who choose to make a plan for adoption are really young or are drug addicted or, you know, are mentally ill. And that is sometimes the case. More often the case that parental rights are terminated in that case, and then the child is made available for adoption. But yeah, and it was funny actually, because I wrestled with Brianna so much. I rewrote her like 50 times. At one point she was like a law school student and she had done, like, she was perfect and everything was right about her. And my editor was like, yeah, I think you went a little too far, like trying to break this myth. You know, but the point is like, you know, and this is like one of the questions is like, adoption is a choice not to parent, right? Choosing to adopt simply means that or choosing to make a plan for adoption simply means that you choose not to parent, right? And that's her situation. She doesn't feel comfortable. She was very young when she had the older kids. She's pregnant again, and she just doesn't feel like she's ready to parent, and that's okay. And it does happen. It happens all the time for all kinds of reasons. And one of the things that I feel very passionately about is that if we are saying that adoption is something we value, and we are saying that this is something that we want to support, that we need to put some financial weight behind it. Mm-hmm. And so actually, like, Texans, like, not a huge fan of Ted Cruz, but I'm going to go ahead and give him props right now, because he is the reason that the adoption tax credit survived and actually was boosted a little bit years ago. It's still not nearly enough. If you adopt, you can get about $13,500 back on your taxes. I think that's right. But really, that's credit to him for that fighting. So if we're going to do that, if we're going to say that we care about adoption, we want to support women who make plans for adoption and families who want to adopt, we need to put some money behind it on all sides.
I totally agree. That is so interesting. I had no idea about that.
Yeah.
What kind of advice would you give non-adoptive people to interact with adoptive parents?
What a good question. I haven't been asked that yet. It's not shameful. Like, we're a family just like any other family, right? That's one of the reasons. That's the title of the book. I will say that I think that language is really important with adoption, and it wasn't until I went into adoption training that I really thought about that. But so it's a kindness not to say things like his parents or his real parents, right? Because I'm his parent and I'm his real parent. His birth parents are his parents and his real parents too, right? But the relationship is just different. So I know it's tricky for people sometimes, because like we associate like pregnancy with motherhood, but that's not the case necessarily. So just kind of be careful about your language. And if you don't know how to say it, you can ask. One of my personal pet peeves is put up for adoption. That always makes it sound like we're literally like putting a baby on a shelf,
right.
which is not the case.
Makes sense. That is
So
so
you might have
funny.
heard me like say make a plan for adoption, which is generally, and that also like my son's birth parents didn't give him up. They're still in his life, right? You know, he didn't go anywhere. Like we are parenting him, but he is still their child. And he's still part of their family. We're all one family. So I guess I would just say like be careful about your language, but also, you know, we're a family just like you are.
Right. I wanted to mention that there is someone in the chat who says that her son's birth mother was much older than her when he was born, which is
Oh, cool. That is
I wanted to ask
fascinating.
if anybody in the chat, if you feel comfortable, wants to tell us if you are an adoptive parent or not an adoptive. I mean, I would be so interesting. She said that she was 34 and I was 30. That is fascinating. Wow.
That is fascinating. It's just, I mean, I don't know. I mean, but it just goes to show you, like people make plans for adoption for all kinds of reasons, right? And you don't know. And again, like that narrative and that sort of like, is this believable? It was funny actually, because when I was working on this book, I was in the park in a playground talking to another dad while our kids were playing, and he said, I told him that my son was adopted, and he said, oh, we're actually about to adopt a baby. Baby's due in, I don't know, say it was January and it was November or something. And he said, yeah, this is her 7th child, I think. And she actually had custody of 2, I think, and was parenting 2. But when he said that, I was like, okay, like Brianna's real, everybody.
Yeah. Yes.
I was like, there, you know,
True.
the whole like truth is stranger than fiction thing, you know, like whatever you think of, right? You think of the 16-year-old, you know, the 16-year-old pregnant birth mom, like, no, like this birth mom was 34, you know, it is what it is. Everybody's different.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think it's interesting as it's becoming less, I don't want to say taboo, but it was something you didn't want to talk about. You do hear more interesting, fascinating stories, and I think it's wonderful. So
yeah, and I think it's exciting because it just expands our definition of family. So one of our family friends, so the husband was married previously and his wife passed away, and so her parents don't have any grandchildren.
Okay.
But our friends, you know, treat them like grandparents to their son. So even though they're not, you know, biologically related, and you know, his late wife is not around anymore, they're still grandparents. So it's like just the more ways that we can expand and include and choose and build our families, I say the better.
Well, it's only going to enhance the next generation, you
Right.
know, for more and more people to love a child. So.
Right. That's what I always say. I say my son is so lucky because at birth, he had more people who loved him than most people get in their whole lives. Like how lucky is that?
Yeah, love it. So one of the neat things about this book was the inclusion of the letters from potential adoptive parents. What was that like to write those letters?
That was really fun. So again, that was another place where I was trying to get like cram as many perspective. And I just saw that chat thing pop up and I didn't get to read the whole thing, but someone who said they went through infertility and the book resonated with them so much. Thank you for saying that. That means so much to me. I really worked very hard and talked to so many, and this is relevant to the question you just asked too. I really worked hard and talked to so many adult adoptees and adoptive families who adopted at infancy, families who adopted older kids, family who adopted from internationally, from foster care. Like I tried birth parents, like I tried to talk to everybody for this. And I was about like, how can we expand our understanding of adoption and how can I start some conversations about this? So I always say, like, be careful when you talk to a writer because they will flat out steal stuff from you. So there's a bunch of stuff in this book that's stolen, like Tate's bedwetting issue, flat out stolen from a friend of mine. And some of these sort of, as you described, like the conversations with hopeful adoptive parents, those are also like real things, like real situations. And again, it's just like people come to adoption for all kinds of reasons. And my goal with those was to make every one of them have something a little bit wonderful and a little bit terrible about them. Because again, like I said, you know, one of the things that happens when you want to adopt is people start to interrogate you. And I'm not saying that's inappropriate, right? We certainly want to make sure that kids are going into safe and loving and supportive homes. But also being put in this position of having to decide who would be a good parent, right? Like what makes a good parent? What makes a good mother? And so I really wanted to put the reader in that place where you have to read it and you have to decide, like, and remember that you're deciding a child's fate. Right? I mean, this is why we are so careful about this. But it's a tricky thing, and it's always a little bit of a crapshoot, right? Like sometimes, you know, it's like who's the right parent for this child? I have certainly met biological parents who were not the right parent for their child, you know.
That is true. So, and whenever I was reading those letters, I kept thinking one is going to jump out as the right one. And it didn't feel that way. It felt like, well, this baby would be happy, you know, in any of them, in any of their families. Okay, so when I was reading this book and I was getting to the end, in my back of my mind, I was like, will this end with Elizabeth adopting the baby? I kept thinking, like, is it going to go there? Which, I mean, I was interested to see if that was going to way it was going to happen. And then I was also interested to see if it wasn't going to happen that way. Talk about your decision to make it where she ends up not adopting the baby.
Yeah. So initially, I think I wanted to leave it even more open than it is. Like it's still like maybe a little bit open, but I also really like wanted to take her grief and her loss seriously, because that's the thing is like nobody takes her seriously. And there is like, oh, you'll be fine, you'll be fine, you'll be fine, you know, you'll be great parents. And she's like, no, listen to me, like I really am not ready for this. So I really wanted people to take her seriously. I also kind of just like love the idea of this family just like being like a paper chain at Christmas time, you know, that just like keeps going and keeps growing and keeps evolving to new and wonderful things. But again, like, you know, I think I have a tendency to want like a very simple, happy ending. And that would have been the simple, happy ending, right? But if this is a book about how complex family is and how wonderful it is in its complexity, then the tidy ending doesn't work. And Elizabeth needs time, right? Elizabeth should have taken time before they adopted Violet, but she kind of didn't know that what she needed at the time, and so she needs some time, and I kind of want to respect that in her. Like, let's give her a little time to go to therapy, a little time to work things out, a little time for Violet not to be an infant anymore. God bless like these parents who, you know, like when they walk in, I help out at my son's, or I used to help out at my son's daycare, and I would be in the baby room and the mom would walk in and be like, oh, I'm pregnant again, you know, we're due. And I'm like, oh my gosh, your child is 6 months old. God bless you.
Right. I know. So true. I personally I admired that Elizabeth was very sure that she was not ready to adopt again. I mean, especially when you're going through so many like, you know, guilty traps in your head of like what your parenting's supposed to be like, how am I supposed to feel, that she knew that they were not going to adopt that baby. That I was like, that's a really good awareness of yourself and of your own health and who you are. So, but it was really interesting to kind of keep going and being like, where is this going to go? This will be good to read.
Yeah, well, and too, I mean, it's, you know, they talk about like the only child thing in that book, which is like, you know, and Violet's an only child, but not an only child, right? Yes. And it's something that happens with us all the time, you know, sort of like, oh, are you one and done, you know? And it's like, well, there's kind of nothing wrong with that, right?
Exactly.
Like you're, you know, if you want to have one child, like that's okay. And if you know, as long as you can love them and take care of them, and if you want to have, 12 children, as long as you can love them and take care of them, like go for it. This whole weird thing where we're like judging and questioning other people's parenting and family choices is just a little weird.
So true.
I think you need to write, I was going to say, write a book about all these inappropriate things people say to you.
Yes.
Do you know what though? Like, I take it as it's intended. You know what I mean? So like one of the most common questions I get is how much did your baby cost? And it's like, I know what you're asking. Okay. And so I'm going to like look for the spirit of what you're asking, and I'm going to try to educate you so that you say that a little more gently next time, you know? And I would tell you like I would tell you my standard answer. My standard answer is my baby didn't cost anything. The process to adopt him cost us about $13,000, which is why I specifically know that thing about the tax credit, because we were lucky. If you do private infant adoption, it can cost you $40,000 and up. If you do international adoption, it can be even more than that, add on travel costs and things like that. So like I said, if we're serious that adoption is something that we want to support and encourage, we need to put some money behind it. Because like even $13,000, like who has $13,000 just like lying around to be like, here you go, I'll get that back next year on my taxes, thanks,
Check. So talking about where this baby might wind up at some point, when you were writing these letters from prospective parents, was there a certain family that you were hoping that her baby would wind up in?
Yep.
Really?
Fun.
I'm glad I didn't pick.
I'm not telling you. But yeah, I absolutely have a preference.
I would love to know if anybody has a guess.
Well, and I kind of love to know like people's opinions. It was funny because my editor too. So my editor's very young. She's like lives in New York City, like super progressive. And like some of these people really pushed her buttons. And she was like, I think we need to change this one. And I was like, okay, hang on one second. Like, let's separate out. Like, are you personally bothered by this person, or are you saying it's not working? Because there were a handful of them that I felt, the single guy. Yeah, the single guy. Too. Stole that from my next door neighbor. That's exactly what he did. He got an egg donor and a gestational surrogate and had a baby. I think he was like 47. Yeah, Kelsey, cutest little thing ever. Yeah.
Oh, that's who I was thinking I would want. Elizabeth, do you have anybody off the top of your head?
I thought it was the lesbian couple.
I thought they were gonna get it. They weren't the volunteers, right? There was like one that were like very, very.
I think that one was and of course, remember I read this in April.
Yes.
I think she was
the professor and the florist.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yes. That's true.
And the professor was adopted from China.
I was thinking it was international.
Oh, okay. That would have been a good pick too. Yeah. But when you were saying about the man at the beginning, sorry to bring it back on. Talking about wanting a clean cut, because while you're talking, I'm thinking of my friends who are adopted themselves. Like my uncle did not know he was adopted till he was 50 years old, and his dad died, and his mom said, "I have something to tell you." He did not want him to know while he was alive, and it blew his mind. He had no idea. And then I had another friend who adopted from Texas to California. It's an open adoption, and the father of the baby signed off. Then when the baby was born, so the baby was supposed to be biracial. The baby was born, was not biracial. There was another dad. So then the whole adoption had to like halt till they found this other dad.
Oh, right.
And she didn't know, like, because if he would have said like, no, I want the baby.
Right.
It's just, it was very harrowing to go through.
Yeah. And that's another thing. And I didn't really talk about that, I don't think, in this book, but this whole thing of adoptions being like at legal risk, because we want to give birth parents, every opportunity to choose to parent this child, right? Because we know that can be really beneficial to the adoptee too. And it was funny because so in Colorado, I think the birth parents have like 6 months or something to sign
Yes,
the
I think
termination
it's similar in
paperwork.
California.
And so we were, because like we got along so well with the birth parents, like we were always like the easiest people that the adoption agency had to deal with. So we were so far down on the list, but that meant that we as the adoptive parents like had this baby and we were always kind of on tenterhooks, like, is this all going to fall apart?
Right.
And we do have, I do have some friends who have had failed adoption, where they had actually, again, like brought the baby home, and then a few weeks later, the birth family changed their mind. And it's just like, it's heart-wrenching on every side, right? I mean, I can see every single side of it. So like, it is complicated. It is deeply, deeply complicated. And then you talk about like, we have all these stories of people who didn't know, people who are still like, they go to do a DNA test on ancestry.com or, 23andMe, and it's like, surprise,
Right.
And so that's why I'm so glad that we're getting better about talking about these things. And that's why I was so passionate about writing a book to help people kind of ask questions maybe, or think about it more, because it is complex, and it is, yeah. And then international adoption, like there's a whole other layer there. So I'm glad that we're not living in those ages anymore.
Yes. I kind of wonder sometimes if because of ancestry.com, there's no more family secrets, like they're going to come out now. No one can go and never find out if you, of course, go on one of those sites.
If you want to, yeah. Well, and I have we have a friend who's an adult adoptee, and he was contacted by, it was a closed adoption. He was contacted by his birth mother, and he went back and forth about it a lot, and finally decided that he didn't want to get in contact with her. So it's like, people have all kinds of opinions and all kinds of choices. And actually, I was thinking, I wanted to mention, so my friend Kelly O'Connor McNeese wrote a lovely book called The Myth of Surrender, which came out like March this year. And it is about maternity homes in the 1960s in Illinois, where sort of like when the girls were sent away. I can't remember why I started thinking about this. Maybe like because one of them is a biracial relationship, and the kid is biracial, which of course in the 1960s is like this whole additional level of hysteria. But anyway, if anybody wants to read more sort of about the history and the way that things were managed and mismanaged differently back then, The Myth of Surrender is a lovely book for that too.
Oh, that's good.
That sounds really good.
That one up.
So there's our final question, unless Elizabeth has any on her mind, which is so easy to keep thinking of things. I would like to know if you have an official definition for yourself of what family is.
Oh gosh, you have such good questions. I think family is whoever you choose to call your family. Right. I mean, I think that's one of the things about this book is, again, like wrestling with this terminology and like, what do you call everybody and what's their relationship to each other? And it's like, it doesn't, we're lucky. Sometimes I think about this. So we live, my husband and I live very far away from our family. So the only like real family we have here is my son's birth parents. But we have a huge family here, right? And it's like people that I call my family because they are there for us when they need us, and they love us unconditionally, and they love my son unconditionally, and they don't get mad when I send them adorable pictures of him, because he really is. And you know what? I'm not genetically responsible for him, so I can say he is adorable.
Like, it's an unbiased opinion.
Totally unbiased opinion. So family is whoever you choose to call your family. And I think that I hope that's the realization that the people come to in this.
Yeah. Well, we would love to know what you are working on next. We're already ready for another.
That's the biggest, like, you spend 2 years, 5 years, 7 years working on a book, and then people are like, well, what now?
Yeah.
So I'm on a little bit of a sabbatical because I have 2 things that are finished, but I'm not sure what I want to do with them. But I can tell you that if it's coming from me, it's always going to be about chosen family, people who get, I always say people who lose their way and find their family. That's what my stories are always about. So that's what's going to be next, no matter what it is.
I love it. Well, I now I can't wait. I want it to come out now. That was such a good pitch. That was so great. Well, thank you so much, Eleanor. This has been such a fun talk, and I'm so glad that you sat next to Elizabeth and she knew you were fun to talk to already at the Mountains and Plains. Yeah. It's always nice when we have an author who's just as, fun, extroverted and fun to talk to as they are to read their book.
Oh, thank you. And Elizabeth, thank you for going to Aspen just for this conversation.
I just love books so much.
You would do that though, Elizabeth.
I totally would.
You really would.
Yeah,
very much like you.
Yeah.
Well, for just about 30 seconds, if you don't mind, Eleanor, we're going to introduce our next book for next month. Club, I know. And I'm going to post some links in the chat. I'm going to let Elizabeth talk about it. First is a Zoom link to sign up. And then the second one is to buy the book from Fabled. We would love to have you join this next time. So I will turn it over to her.
Yeah, so we're doing something totally different than normal. And that is we're going to do a book from our sci-fi fantasy section. And it is, I've got it on my phone here, A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. Now, this book, I had heard, it was, I'd heard good things. It's set in Scotland. It reminded me of The Princess Bride. It has a very, very great feel to it. And it's a duology. So the first one is out, A River Enchanted, and the second one is coming out December the 6th. So this will give you time to read this one. We have beautiful hardbacks. You're going to want a hardback on your shelf because it is so gorgeous. And I promise you will love this book. So we'll be talking to Rebecca in October. Nope. September. One of those months coming up. Yeah.
Yes.
And Eleanor, again, I think we could talk to you for another hour. You were so much fun. And I'm so thankful we are so thankful that you joined us tonight.
Oh, thank you for choosing the book. Unfortunately, I can't talk for another hour because I need to go put the 4-year-old to bed. But thank you so much for having me and for choosing the book. I really appreciate it.
All right. Have a good night.
Thank you guys so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.